David, you take it away, please.
I'm game, Chief.
Should everybody mute themselves?
Welcome, everybody, and welcome to the Rotary E-Club of World Peace. This is December 7th, as we evolve into winter and share this season with each other. And we're just going to hear some wonderful, wonderful stories from Dara, and I'm really looking forward to this. Also, just want to share a couple of insights. Over the weekend, I was honored to participate in and speak at the World Peace Conference in Bangladesh. That had people from around the world, the Prime Minister, it was incredible. And all of the stories and the things that are the challenges and what they're looking for. And it's about the fundamentals, education, peace, living, everyone living it in our lives. And the other is, I also wrote an article coming up for December 10th on human rights, the Human Rights Day. And the article really looking back at thousands of years that human beings have been dealing with the issues of human rights, going back to things would be very different if we all lived by the golden rule, and all religions have a golden rule. And with both of them coming together, what we do, what each of us does around peace and peace building and reflecting that in our lives with those around us, in our communities, wherever we do, it's vital that we do it. We're all contributing to the mindset as well as the energy of a peace building in the world. So I just want to say,
Yeah, Arthur, please mute yourself.
Somebody mute themselves.
There you go. Thank you.
Great. So Rudy, you've got it.
Okay, thank you. And I do want to, before I introduce everybody here tonight, welcome everybody. Remember that this is Pearl Harbor Remembrance Day.
Yes.
And
yes,
so
it is.
let's keep that in our thoughts. And also want to thank Tammy last night for a great meditation online with harp music. It was a lovely hour.
I wasn't able to link into that.
I'm sorry. I made Tammy a co-host, and I was supposed to be meditating with my eyes closed. I didn't see you there, so you came in a minute or two late. So I apologize for not letting you in. I'll keep my eyes open for a few more minutes next time. But
Sala, I saw you come in like literally as I finished the last song. So I intentionally didn't let you in because I thought, oh, you'll just like get in and out. So I apologize. Yeah.
Well, I meditated here.
there you go. It was very good, and I know we saw some great comments. And Dee, I know with his family there enjoyed it, and it was a special time for us all. So
Will that happen again?
yes, every other month on the first Monday of every other month. So the next one will be February. Is that right, Tammy?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Okay, now I'll send out the note each time with that invite. So those who are interested. So it was a very relaxing and connecting. And Tammy, you know how you counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, peace has 5 letters in it. So instead of counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I said PEACE in my mind over and over and over in there. So
What a cool idea.
It is.
Very creative.
It is.
that's where I was thinking.
Wow.
But anyways, we'll go on with tonight. My lovely bride is sitting over here next to me, Karen, on the other half of the lake over here. Barbara, great to see you from Santa Barbara. Mark is making snowballs over in Hawaii. So once in a lifetime, and Dara will get to you in a moment. Lorene, great to have you on here.
Thank you.
We'll later on we'll find out some special stories about Barbara that only you can tell us. Anya, good to see you tonight. Arthur, always great to see you, sir.
Getting ready for my brother and sister to come out for Christmas and enjoy a Baja Christmas, a little bit of doing Santa and that kind of thing.
Oh, lovely.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah, happy he
Yeah,
is.
send us some photos of you with the kids passing out presents, if you would, please. We love that. So Tammy, good to see you again tonight. Dee, always, as always, great to have you with us. And Carol, good to see you. Terry, great to see you. How's everything in Georgia?
Good.
It was
Getting winter
good.
weather.
Okay. David's being peaceful in Ashland. Tony, good to see you, or at least see your name up there tonight.
I'm there, and thank you. It's good to be here.
Great. And Jack is
Oh,
over in
Yep.
Santa Barbara, so all's well, Jack.
yeah, I got to get cataract surgery tomorrow morning.
But Karen had, when she had hers done about a year ago, did both eyes at the same time, a very successful operation.
Really?
So,
Gosh, I'm getting one done 1 week apart. Reminds me of a quick story where this doctor's performing surgery on this guy, and he goes, "Don't worry, Bob. It's just a minor operation. Don't be so nervous. To stop shaking." So the patient goes, "My name's not Bob." The surgeon goes, "I know, my name is Bob."
yeah,
Brother.
Bob and
So
weave.
confident.
Okay, good. Okay, Sala,
Yeah,
good to see you.
I'm
And
back
Rich-
home.
And Richard,
Back
we'll drink to that.
Cheers.
There you go. Joni, good to see you tonight. Sherry's on. Elizabeth, great to see you.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to greetings from Oregon.
Peggy, how's everything up north?
14 degrees this morning.
Oh, 14 degrees in Evanston. Wow.
Yeah.
There you go. Keeping things cool up there. Lisa, great to see you. Thank you for sending me that form. I appreciate that.
You bet.
Joyce, good to see you tonight. Joyce is waiting for number 99. We have 98 members, and she's going to be our 100th. So we're that close to 100. So yeah, hope everything's well with you.
Thank you.
Fred,
Everything's fine.
great. That's super. Fred, great to be on your meeting this morning and the work you're doing there and saving that young woman from Afghanistan. Powerful message. And, we're just with you there. Any help we can give, let us know.
Fred, are you in your boat?
Everybody.
Good stuff. Okay, making it across here. Marcia, good to see you. Irene, good to see you tonight. Denise is on. And Melissa, how are you?
Good, thank you. Thanks.
Great. Dennis
Glad to be here.
Yeah, great. Dennis is making world winning fruitcake. So we have to taste some of that, Dennis. It depends on the kind of alcohol you put in, I think.
Pretty good single malt scotch. And basically, you can taste it virtually.
There you go. So Sherry just said it was only 7 degrees or -7 in Minnesota. So Sharon and Bob, how are you? In Cathedral City, Warren, everything okay with you? Good there. Mary Jo, great to see you. Bill Timpson's on with us. Bill, hi. Catherine, how are you tonight?
Doing well, thank you.
Great. Sharon,
Nice to
as always, great to see you.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And we get some Russian cuisine tonight, so we're all set for that. Good for that. Peter, great to see you.
Hello.
Michael, hope all is well. And
Thank you. How are you?
good. We're doing well. Jamie's on.
Yes,
And-
hello.
Hey, and Kanadi's on. And Dennis wants to create a cookbook here for recipes for peace. So we're looking at how we contribute to that. So it's great to have everybody on with us tonight. This is it's going to be a fun evening. And I think all of us have figured out that we actually do eat. So we're going to learn about some fantastic recipes, hopefully from around the world here, and that connection tonight. So it's going to be a fantastic evening. And again, great to have everybody with us here. Anya, would you please introduce our speaker for this evening?
Yes, I'll be happy to. So I met Dara about 40 years ago, but Dara didn't let me lie. She already mentioned that we actually met 50 years ago at Stanford. At the time I was teaching at Stanford and Dara was a graduate student there. So Dara's past has Russian Jewish roots. Her grandmother on her mother's side, being a Russian Jew, never liked to talk about her childhood in Russia, but she loved to cook and bake. Understanding Dara's grandmother's reluctance to talk about her childhood, Dara decided to learn more about her family roots by studying Russian language at Vassar College, and later at Stanford as a doctoral student in the Slavic department. She wanted to write her dissertation on food in Russian literature, but she was told to come up with something more serious. Dara finished her graduate work at Stanford, got her PhD, and went to work at Williams College in Massachusetts. She continued with her interests in food. As I occasionally followed her online, I saw that her fascination with Russian food and culture remained in the center of her interests. However, her fascination with food is very much different from that of other famous culinary figures. Her interest in food is based on the recognition of the deep connection between the food of a given country and the soul and culture of that country's people. Her first book, À la Russe, a cookbook of Russian hospitality, came out in 1983, and it was published fairly soon after she arrived at Williams College. Notice the emphasis in the title on the cultural extension of cooking, hospitality. It was not just a cookbook, but a cookbook of Russian hospitality. And Russians are not big on saying, "How are you?" a question which really does not require an answer. But if Russians do invite you to their home, they treat you like a friend. She developed a course, Feasting and Fasting in Russian History, which reflects her desire for a deeper understanding of the role of food in Russia. This again reflects Dara's deep understanding of the connection between the food and its cultural, historical connections to its people. Some other highlights of Dara's career are found in an acclaimed journal, Gastronomica, consulting for the famous Russian Tea Room, books The Vegetarian Heart and Baking Boot Camp. She is an editor of Culinary Culture of Europe, Identity, Diversity, and Dialogue. Book Beyond the North Wind, Russia in Recipes and Lore. It came out in 2020. This cookbook was named on many best 2020 lists, including lists from New York Times, the Washington Post, and Esquire magazine. Dara describes the aim of this book by saying, I wanted to immerse myself in the Russian land and remember and reflect on what it gave to its people. This is a place with a short growing season and a long winter, but there are absolute riches in the ground. There are mushrooms and berries with flavors we can't even begin to imagine because ours don't get that same midnight sun. I want to go back to elemental foods and connect with the land. So Dara, welcome.
Thank you so much, Anya. It's really wonderful to see you again after so many years. You look wonderful. And thank you, Rudy, for inviting me to speak to the Rotarians. As I mentioned, my brother-in-law is very active in the North Carolina Raleigh Rotary Club. And so I've known about your activities for years and think it's wonderful how you approach being in the world. I first went to, it was not Russia, it was the Soviet Union in 1972, very much still the height of the Cold War. And I was actually working, I took a year off from graduate school because I wanted to get my language skills stronger. And I was working for the United States Information Agency as an exhibition guide for an exhibition about American agriculture that was touring the Soviet Union. And it was a wonderful opportunity for me to immerse myself in Soviet life, but it was very difficult because USIA was part of the State Department, and therefore I was sort of seen as an enemy agent. And it was very stressful, even though it was very exciting and very heady. But I did have a run-in with the KGB. I was nearly sent back to the States. And I felt as though I was ready to give up my studies at Stanford. And then I realized that even though the politics were complex and there was a lot of ugliness between the governments, people had been extraordinary to me, often at great risk to themselves because it was not wise to allow an American into your home. But they showered me with love and with amazing food. And that's really where my first cookbook came from. It was both an attempt to salvage my own studies, but at the same time, it was to share the beauty of Russian culture and Russian cuisine with Americans who thought of Russia as the evil empire, and unfortunately still do. Most of the news you read about Russia is very negative. At the moment, things are looking pretty bad. And what I try to do in some small way is mitigate that and remind people that even when politics are really ugly, there is still beauty within a culture and things that are worth knowing. So this latest cookbook that I wrote, Beyond the North Wind, Russian Recipes and Lore, that came out in 2020, was sort of a surprise for me because I had already written the Russian cookbook that Anya mentioned in 1983. But my editor, I had just published a book about Nordic cuisine, fire and ice, classic Nordic cooking. And she said, why don't you write about Russia? And I said, I've already done that. I've been there, I've done that. And she said, you probably have more to say. And I realized that in my first book, I had described Soviet life, and I had also looked back very longingly at the haute cuisine of the 19th century, what the aristocracy was eating. And much of this was very much influenced by French cuisine. And I realized I hadn't really described elemental Russian food, the food that came from the land, as Anya mentioned. And so I decided that I needed to do that. And that's how this book arose. So I'm going to share my screen now and see. Is it showing up for you?
Yes, it is.
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay. So one of the most immediate ways to get to know another culture is through its food. I taught Russian language at Williams for many years, and the students struggled with the grammar. They struggled with a lot of things. But every time I had them over to my house and they could taste Russia, then suddenly things opened up and became much easier for them. In Russia, particularly, it is a way of showing respect, the idea of hospitality, guests are a gift from God. So how did I set out to find what is most elemental about Russian cuisine? Well, I was thinking about this and I wanted to avoid the big cities, Moscow, St. Petersburg, and the places that had been influenced by Western traditions or now global traditions. And in my research, I came across this utopia that was described by the ancient Greeks. Pliny and Herodotus talked about a place called Hyperborea, which means beyond the north wind. And it was a land that they described. You crossed the Carpathian Mountains and then you crossed all these rivers. And then you came to this land where the sun always shone and where the people were tall and blonde and beautiful. And Apollo spent his winters there. And it was also, very importantly, the birthplace of technology. And Russian and Soviet geographers followed these maps that were described by the ancient Greeks, and they decided that, I'm trying to, there we go. They decided that this place, this Hyperborea, this beautiful utopia, was located on the Kola Peninsula. And you can see it here on this map. It's above the Arctic Circle. It comes down here. Here is Finland, Norway comes over here. And I decided that's where I had to go. And I wanted to go to the edges of the earth. These two photographs that you just saw are from a little village here called Teriberka, which if any of you saw the film Leviathan, it was shot there. On the Barents Sea. And indeed, the sun in the summertime shines all the time. It's the white nights of the polar summer, 24 hours of daylight. The people, there are indigenous Sami who live there, but there were also Vikings who came over from the West. And so they were tall, blonde, and beautiful. And it was there that I found what I was looking for. In the winter time, the sun doesn't rise at all, so it's very dark. And one of the earliest foods that the early Slavs, even before they became a nation in 988, when they accepted Christianity, one of the earliest foods they made were these pancakes in the shape of the sun. These are blini. You probably know blini as these tiny little silver dollar sized pancakes that you get at receptions, and they often have smoked salmon on them. The real Russian blini are plate size, 4 or 5 inches in diameter, and they're made during the season just before Lent, just before the spring solstice, to welcome back the sun after a very long winter. And so they're in the image of the sun. And they are also baked in a Russian stove, which I will show you soon. So they're a very different thing than what you get in American cocktail parties. Once the sun comes out, then the whole place is transformed. And you have this amazing green. And this is a man I met in a very tiny village in the Russian north. I can't believe that we both ended up in the same sort of hunter's green. And then this incredible green backdrop. And it's not, this isn't a fake picture. This is actually a lake in the woods. We were a bit plagued by mosquitoes, which are really bad there. But I wanted to show this to you because people have this idea of Russia as really dark and gloomy and grim and drab and dreary, and I could go on with adjectives. But when the sun shines on the snow, like you saw in the first slide, and in the summertime, when you have this, brilliant green, it's really quite an extraordinary place. And when the snow melts, one of the things that the Russians love to do is go out foraging. This is my friend Oksana, who lives in Murmansk. And we went out into the tundra there are virtually no trees there, but there is amazing moss, all kinds of plants together. And she found a very rare Arctic bramble. And so she was extremely excited. Now, foraging in the United States has become very, very trendy. And there are official foragers who'll take you out, and it is a wonderful pastime. But for the Russians, there's something more than that. It's not, like a trendy activity. It's in their DNA. And it's not just about getting the fruit or the mushrooms or the herbs, whatever you're looking for. It's really about communing with nature and being one with the land. They cultivate a lot of berries that you see in the upper left-hand side. But my favorite berries are the ones that we can't get mostly in the United States: cloudberries, which grow in very swampy areas, lingonberries, and sea buckthorn, which I notice there's someone here who lives in Oregon. And Oregon and Washington do have wonderful sea buckthorn. And just to the left, you can see this tonic, a recipe for sea buckthorn juice that's slightly thickened that I have in my cookbook. And it's just amazing. It's like a superfood. It's very tart, but you add some sugar to it. And it has tons of vitamin C and also lots of essential oils in it. Now, John Tradescant, who was a very famous English botanist and a collector of plants, he traveled all over the world. And the plants that he brought back to England became the basis of the collection at the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford and at Oxford University. And in the mid-17th century, he went to Arkhangelsk, which was the largest city in the Russian north. And he, in his journals, wrote about the amazing berries that he found there, the most extraordinary ones he had ever tasted, and also the Russian honey, which he felt was the most delicious honey in the world. And in Russia, even today, there are still annual fairs where people sell all different kinds of honey. I mean, just this huge range. Not just from different trees and flowering plants, but also a lot of different consistencies. The Russian North was, and still is, has the taiga, which is a boreal forest, a very dense forest. And there used to be so many wild hives and wild bees there that early travelers would tell about great lakes and pools of honey just for the taking. And there's one very funny story that was recorded. I mean, I'm sure it's apocryphal, but a man who was in the woods and he wanted to get some honey, and he reached into the hollow of a tree to get the honey from the hive, and he fell in. And he was stuck in this pool of honey, and then a bear came along. And he grabbed the tail of the bear, and the bear pulled him out. And of course, it's not a true story, but you can imagine that it might have happened. But the Russians used honey as their sweetener until the late 19th century, when sugar from sugar beets became inexpensive. And so they started using sugar. It was much cheaper than honey, but they still have a very strong desire for honey and a love of honey that is quite wonderful. In the foraging, they also get all kinds of wild herbs, and they make wonderful herbal blends to make tea. And there's still a lot of homeopathy there, particularly during the Soviet period. It wasn't always easy to get medicine, so people relied a lot on these wild foods that they gathered to make their own kind of medicinal concoctions. Flour that we take for granted, flour from wheat, was also a rarity in Russia. The growing season, even in the more temperate parts, was quite short. wheat until more recent times when they've developed hardy hybrids is a lot more temperature sensitive than rye. And so it didn't grow in the far north. And so they relied mainly on rye, which was the staple grain, but they also used a lot of oats and millet, barley, and also buckwheat. But people in the north of Russia would take the cherries from a tree called the bird cherry tree. It is Prunus, and now I have just forgotten the rest of the Latin name, but they would dry the cherries and then they would grind them into this flour. And you can see how beautiful and brown it is. And it has a flavor that is almost chocolatey, but with a cherry tang to it. And here's a cake that I made from it with lingonberry frosting on top, a lingonberry sour cream frosting. And to my great surprise and delight, they're now selling this on Amazon. So if you want to experiment with it, it's really quite wonderful and it will amaze all of your friends. Probably the most important thing that the Russians forage besides the berries is mushrooms. And I just want to read this passage from Vladimir Nabokov's Speak Memory, his memoirs, because it really captures what it means to go out foraging for the Russians. And he's talking about his mother. One of her greatest pleasures in summer was the very Russian sport of khadits po griby, looking for mushrooms. Fried in butter and thickened with sour cream, her delicious finds appeared regularly on the dinner table. Not that the gustatory moment mattered much. Her main delight was in the quest. Rainy weather would bring out these beautiful plants in profusion under the firs, birches, and aspens in our park. Its shady recesses would then harbor that special boletic reek, which makes a Russian's nostrils dilate, a dark, dank, satisfying blend of damp moss, rich earth, rotting leaves. And this is my friend Sasha with his basket. And whoops, I want to go back one. Here you can see what he found on his hunt, and it made him very happy indeed. So mushrooms would be eaten fresh, but really the purpose of much of the foraging, the berries as well, is to preserve for the very long winter when food would be scarce, and certainly fresh food and vitamins would be much more difficult to obtain. So mushrooms would be dried, they'd also be salted. Food could be smoked. Here you see some beautiful mackerel from the Barents Sea that has been smoked over alderwood. And all of this activity took place in the Great Russian Masonry Stove. This is one that has been gussied up in a museum, but it is a wood-burning oven that it's made of brick and or stone rubble, and then it's covered over with stucco. And these stoves were really massive, and they took up a good quarter of a typical peasant cottage. They used a lot of wood. So it's not like, say, Chinese cuisine where you have stir fry. One of the reasons that stir fry developed was because fuel was very scarce and very expensive. And so you wanted to use as little as possible and cook things quickly. In Russia, it's quite different. They had this enormous northern forest. The fuel was right there for the taking. Granted, you had to cut down the trees and you had to split it and you had to fire the stove, but the fuel was there. And the great wonder of this stove is its baking properties and everything else it can do. And it really defined the nature of Russian cuisine. When it was extremely hot after first being fired, you would scrape the ashes, the embers to the back, or scrape them out entirely, and you would bake breads or pies. Then as the temperature began to fall, you would put in casserole dishes of grains or vegetables. Most peasants were not eating meat, but it was a time when if you had some meat, you could have done that. You put soup in, And as the temperature continued to fall, it was used for other purposes, such as culturing dairy products when it was very low. If you think about making yogurt and you want just a very low temperature to allow the culturing to happen, and drying mushrooms. Up here, you can see that there's a ledge, and this is where the old people would lie because it was the warmest place in the cottage, and little kids would clamber up there as well. So here I am in the Russian north making blini in the Russian stove. They actually used to be baked. They were not made on a griddle as they are today. And it was really quite thrilling to taste real Russian blini at the source. Here is my friend who has taken a pot of potatoes out of the stove. The pots that were used were like our ceramic bean pots, so with a bulbous shape, or else they were made of cast iron. And both of these materials are really good for using in the stove, and they impart a very different flavor to foods. So when you have these potatoes, she had boiled them in water just with a little salt, and then she drained the water out, and butter is good on it, a little bit of sour cream, but basically you don't need anything else. They just have a little bit of smoky flavor from the fire, and it's wonderful. It was quite sad after the Soviet Union collapsed because suddenly there were the so-called new Russians who had all kinds of money, and they wanted to go out to the countryside, to the dachas, to these old cottages that still stood with their Russian stoves, and they so many of them were demolished, not the dachas, not the cottages, but the stoves were, so that they could put in like widescreen TVs. And now people are trying to learn how to rebuild them. And one of the greatest things that you can make in the Russian stove is Russian pies. There is a saying that a house is beautiful not for its walls, but for its pies. And these are some of my favorites. They're filled with a slightly sweetened farmer's cheese. They come in all shapes and sizes. And one of the most glorious pies in Russian cuisine is called kulibyaka. Those of you who know French cuisine might know kulibyak, which was adopted in the 19th century from Russian cuisine and fancified using puff paste or brioche as the crust. The Russian crust is usually, brioche is often used now, but it would more likely be a sour cream dough. And this is the one that I put in my latest cookbook. One of my favorite quotes in Russian literature, and one of the reasons I did want to do my dissertation on food in Russian literature, is because there is so much food, particularly in 19th century Russian literature. And there's an amazing story by Chekhov that all of you should try to find. It's in English translation, and it's called The Siren, as in the temptress. And these lawyers are debating a court case, and they want to break for lunch, but they have to finish writing things up. And so the secretary just starts thinking about what they're going to eat. And he starts talking about this fish pie. The kulibyaka should be appetizing, shameless in its nakedness, a temptation to sin. And the name of this pie is gendered as feminine in Russian. So they refer to it as it, but it's really she. And so it's also very erotic and very funny. But this pie has many layers. The classic one has very thin blini on the bottom to make sure the crust doesn't get soggy. And then layers of salmon fillet and sturgeon, either cooked buckwheat or cooked rice, sauteed mushrooms and onions, lots of dill. The classical one has the dried backbone of sturgeon, which is gelatinous and helps the whole thing hold together. And then you often put a little hole in the top of the pie and pour some butter in. And it's really quite wonderful. If there is a hallmark to Russian cuisine besides its pies, it would be a taste for the sour. And this taste for the sour is extremely important. Russian peasants, for instance, if they didn't have their sourdough rye bread, they would feel as though they hadn't really had bread at all. And the pickles too, the mushrooms as well, they're not pickled with vinegar. They're pickled simply by layering them with salt. And you add garlic, you can add dill here. These I added some black currant leaves and some oak leaves to add some tannin so that they remain crisp. You can add black pepper, allspice, you can play with it, but it's really just salt. And what happens then is lactic acid fermentation. And that's what gives them the wonderful sour taste. And it also yields what we call today probiotics. So it's like eating sauerkraut or kimchi. We know now that it's very healthy for you. And the sauerkraut that I mentioned, you take a cabbage, which they would obviously eat fresh in the summer, but even more important was to make the sauerkraut that you see in the lower right, and also to make the classic national Russian soup, which is shchi, in other words, cabbage soup. But the classic cabbage soup is made not with fresh cabbage. A fresh cabbage soup is called lazy cabbage soup because all you do is shred the cabbage and throw it in the pot. But the real one is made with sauerkraut. So you go through the process of making the sauerkraut first. You actually freeze the sauerkraut, it mellows the flavor, and then you make the soup. Another great way to ferment, and a very popular way in Russia, is to make kvass. And kvass is made from black bread, sourdough rye bread, natural bread. And you dry the bread and you add some water, a little bit of yeast, or you can use natural yeast from the air, and a little bit of honey. You can add flavorings like mint or lemon balm, and you allow it to ferment. And within 3 to 4 days, you get this wonderfully effervescent, ever so slightly alcoholic drink that is really quite healthy. So it is sort of like a small beer. It has, again, this sour taste that the Russians love. And this I took a picture of at this great bar in Brooklyn called Honey's, and they make their own mead and their own kvass. Whoops, I'm sorry. You can also make kvass from beets. In this case, you just take the beets and you peel them and you put them in water. I don't even add any salt. And it takes maybe 10 days. You can see it bubbling away. It's begun to ferment. And a lot of Americans now who are very focused on wellness will drink beet kvass, again, for the probiotics. I haven't ever developed a taste for that. I like to make it as the basis for my borscht, and it's really rich and really good. My favorite kvass is a summertime kvass that I make from raspberries. Again, with a little bit of honey for sweetening. And it is like a raspberry champagne. It's very light and quite wonderful. There's another way of fermenting that, as far as I know, is unique to Russia, and it's called machinia, which doesn't have a really good translation in English. It's sort of like brining. And if when you're making sauerkraut or pickles, you have a salt solution that might be 4.5 or 5%. With the brining, it's a very weak solution that's only like 3.5%, and it's used for fruits. So the famous fruits that are made are these brined apples that sit in the brine in a big barrel. And you let them sit for months and they get wizened, as you see here, and they get this really kind of winey flavor that goes beautifully if you slice them and serve them with cheese. Berries are brined like this. Pushkin, the great national, Russia's great national Russian poet, on his deathbed in 1837, as he was dying from a gunshot wound, from a duel, he called out his last words, "Give me some brined cloudberries." And this was at the end of January, so they're quite beloved. And watermelon is also really great to brine. And the other thing that is cultured, of course, as I mentioned earlier, is dairy. So milk, you can get Russian farmer's cheese, tvarog, or you can get a product that is similar to yogurt, простокваша, that you see on the bottom. Whoops. So all of these foods are part of the standard Russian repertoire. And what happened after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, I mean, a lot of things happened and there was terrible economic chaos, and it was a pretty scary, even if it was a very heady time. But the Russians embraced all of these foods that came flooding in from the West. Russia had never had a tradition of making hard cheeses. They always made these fresh farmers' cheeses, and they became obsessed with foreign cheese and all kinds of other fruits and vegetables that during the Soviet years they had never had access to. Well, in
take it off
20
if you want.
Oh, in 2014, Russia invaded Crimea and annexed it. And as a result, the United States, Canada, the EU, Australia, Norway placed sanctions on Russia and did not allow a lot of goods to come into Russia. In 2015, as a countermeasure, the Russians imposed their own agricultural sanctions against food imports from the West. And they had their eye most prominently on cheese, which the Russians had come to love. And this photograph was taken on the western border of Russia in 2015, because they set up what they called mobile crematoria, which is just a horrible term for destroying this food. So they sent big bulldozers in to get any contraband food that was being smuggled into Russia. And there was a huge uproar because in most Russians' minds, they still remembered terrible days of hunger, the siege of Leningrad, all the periodic famines, the hunger in the chaos of the 1990s. And this food was being destroyed instead of being distributed to organizations that needed it. But the Russians were without their cheese. And being enterprising, they decided to learn how to make it themselves. And now there is a booming cheese industry, a domestic industry in Russia, because the sanctions are still in place. And they're making all sorts of cheeses in Western styles, as well as some of their own that they're experimenting with. One of the people spearheading the return to Russian traditions is a guy named Boris Akimov, who founded a cooperative called Lavka Lavka, which means kind of shop, shop. But the idea was to connect farmers who were growing heritage grains that had sort of fallen out of use when everyone was flocking to buy French wheat baguettes instead of the beloved Russian rye, or heritage strains of oats, or people making artisanal jams using honey instead of sugar. He wanted to connect them to a market. So he created these shops, and then he also started researching old recipes and opened cafes. And now he's doing something else. He's doing branding for a big supermarket chain. But there was this amazing revival of traditional Russian foods and a real pride in Russian heritage. So this is one of the products that he tried to brand for selling to the West. And I wanted to show this to you. I'm just about at the end of my talk, because it brings together so many of the themes that interest me. So he puts it into English to sell to a foreign market, but it has many of the right tags. So gluten-free, buckwheat is gluten-free, but that's very prominent. Goods from small family farms of Russia. So they've studied that American consumers like things from small family farms. Country where use of GMO is a crime. You know, again, just hitting all the right buttons. Also, the disconnect here for me is that with all of this focus on tradition and the land and things that are real and clean and organic, he's using imagery from Kazimir Malevich, who was a Russian avant-garde artist who was actually persecuted by the Soviet state, but he was the founder of suprematism, which was really the first abstract movement in Western art. If any of you have seen Black Square or White on White, which is now at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, you know Malevich's work. This linen porridge, it's not linen, it is flaxseed. And then branding vodka for export. So if there's a secular trinity in Russia, it would have to be vodka, black bread, and pickles, all of which I would add rely on fermentation to have the end product. So this brand of vodka is called Valinki. Valinki are these amazing Russian boots. They're made of boiled wool, so they turn into this heavy felt, and they're just the warmest things you can imagine. So they name the vodka after this. And again, they're, you know, harking back to Russian tradition. They're saying here, real Russian soul, because Americans like to think of the Russian soul. You have the snowflakes, so you're calling forth the North. But look at this new patriotic neck hanger. I don't know if my screen share is covering it's covering it on mine, but it says our new patriotic neck hanger. We were in Paris. That would be the Napoleonic Wars in around 1814. We reached Berlin. That would be World War II, 1945. We will be in New York. But I don't want to leave the talk on that note. Politics always intrude. There are threats right now going back and forth. But what I want to leave you with, if I can get to this last slide. Oh no, I can't believe it just did that. Let me just quickly go through. I'm so sorry. This always happens. I just have one last slide, but I want to leave you with the right kind of image. There we go. The Northern Lights, the mystery and the magic of Russia. And that's a little bit of what I hope I've communicated to you this evening. So I will stop the screen share.
There we go.
And there's my brother-in-law, Reagan Weaver, whose face just popped up. Hi, Reagan. He's visiting Southern California, his my niece. Okay.
That's great. Oh, this is wonderful presentation. Thank you. In this, perhaps you could share with us the connection to create peace through food and understanding.
Yes. There is a belief that once you have broken bread with someone, then you are connected once you've shared a meal. If you think about the word companion in English, I love etymologies. I don't know if you've ever stopped and contemplated that word. It comes from the Latin cum, which means with, pane, panis, with bread. So someone you've broken bread with becomes your companion. And there is a bond there, something you've shared. In the Russian tradition, it's extremely important. I mean, people think about Russians and vodka and all that drinking. There is some truth to that, but it's not just about the vodka. It's about gathering around the table. The commensality is what's important, and the toasting. You never, ever, ever drink without toasting first. And the toasting is a way of acknowledging the other person or the other people you're with and bringing them into the circle and telling about their lives, you know, toasting events or, you know, in memory of something. And it's not just a gesture, it is something that's deeply meaningful.
We have some interest in some folks here purchasing your books and or cookbooks. Do you have a website, or how should they do that?
I do. So you can, I mean, you can really just Google me and my website should come up, but it's daragoldstein.com. Or you can go to bookshop.org or amazon.com. Bookshop still gives you a discount and it's a little nicer than Amazon. And my books will come up. So that's where you can find them.
Cool. Arthur, you want to unmute yourself? Do you have a question? Quick here, we're
Yes,
almost in
fabulous,
the meeting here. So.
Presentation. I enjoyed very much visiting Russia when I was a high school student in 1964, one of the first citizen exchange trips ever. And of course, enjoyed the blinis and being a vegetarian, borscht, and some of the great potato latkes and things. But one of the, I guess the question I have is, you know, I remember when I was there thinking, you know, how can we be about to blow up the world to fight these people who are, you know, so warm and loving, welcome us all? And I guess that's a question. How do we in the world where we see what's going on right now between Russia and the US, how can we use food as a weapon to break us down and get us together?
Yeah, you know, it's what I have devoted my life to. I'm still working on it. You know, honestly, it's an uphill battle. I spent some time in Israel working with a Druze sociologist, and we had a project to bring Israeli Palestinians and Israelis together around a shared table, believing that if, you know, we did that, it was to bring children together, children and women, and then, you know, the new young generations would communicate that to the next generation. And on that level, it worked beautifully. But when governments are still, you know, exchanging harsh words and doing things, there, you have to continue to do the grassroots things, but it isn't a magic wand. It's not gonna immediately change things, sadly.
Rudy, I have a question. Is the book called Beyond the North Wind? Is that your cookbook?
That's my most recent one, yeah.
I was looking for it on Amazon and I couldn't find it. Is it better to get it through the book?
It's right on Amazon. I mean, it should be right there.
Okay,
I
good.
mean, I know that it's there. If you have trouble finding it, you can just email me and I will send you a direct link.
North Wind, and the fall and the rise of the mystic North, but that's not the book.
No.
So the
No.
it seems the Russians in their culture and harvesting the mushrooms and
Wonderful.
herbs and all those things were ahead of us in natural foods.
That's right.
Oh, yes. Well, particularly during Soviet times, I mean, the way people survived was they had their own small garden plots because they couldn't rely on the state to provide them with food. And so people, even in the cities, would take these, you know, little local suburban trains out to their small garden plot, and they raised potatoes, you know, cucumbers, tomatoes in the summer, scallions, lots of dill, and gathered the wild foods. And this is really what kept them going.
Your
That's-
book is there. I just found it and it just.
Yeah,
$20.
That's super. David, you have anything to add, please?
Well, this is just an outstanding example again of how we come together and sharing cultures and understanding. That's what makes the world more peaceful and our harmonious relationships that we want everywhere. So thank you for sharing that. And I'd love to get together and have some of this food. So
Me too.
Well, that
Made
would be
us-
ideal.
made me
wouldn't it?
hungry.
Yeah.
absolutely, yes. Well, thank you. And I just want to tell, oh yeah, go ahead, Lori.
I wanted to just tell you, probably 10 years ago, my husband and I actually had the pleasure of having a Russian family. He was in the Moscow Symphony and she was the makeup artist for the Bolshoi Ballet, and they were having trouble getting paid from the symphonies. So they moved here to be a member of the Tijuana Symphony, believe it or not. Well, they ended up living with us for 2 years. What an experience to see how they would cook and their traditions. It was just that we still keep in touch with them.
That must
And
have
it's
been
they're
marvelous.
back in Moscow now. Vladimir and Galina, and Franz is their son who was here while they lived here. And then Franz has since gotten married, and they were so enthralled with my husband who passed away last year. His name was Robert. They named their son Bob. And I mean, this is such an un-Russian name, but anyway, it was quite an experience to see how they cooked. And we would have tangerines on the tree. And I said, Galina, there's so many, I don't know what to do. She'd make these wonderful desserts and it was just amazing. It was a great experience.
That's wonderful.
Sounds
Thank you very much.
Dara,
I
I
think
think you had a story you were going to share about Julia Childs.
Oh, well, that might be a good closer. It has nothing to do with things Russian. But when I moved to Williamstown in 1983 from San Francisco, and I just felt it's a small town, it's an amazing college, and it was a wonderful job, but I felt very isolated here. And so I joined this group called the Culinary Historians of Boston. It was actually the first culinary historian group, food history, in the United States. And Julia was a member. She lived in Cambridge then. And I used to make the 3-hour drive to Boston and back to go to lectures every month. And there was an exhibition at the Fogg Art Museum at Harvard on Dutch 17th century still lifes that had lots of food in them. And so there was a special Saturday morning meeting of the culinary historians where we were allowed to go into the Fogg, have a tour of it with a woman who had been one of the curators, and Julia invited us back to her house for lunch. And I was so excited to go and to meet the great Julia Child. And because it was early in the morning, I had to leave here before 6 a.m., which is not, my best time of day. And it was, I think it was March, it was still cold out, and I got in the car and it's back roads. And there's sort of nothing between here and Boston. And halfway to Boston, I looked down, I saw I was still wearing my slippers. And I was just mortified. I thought I'm going to meet Julia Child, but I can't turn around or else I won't, get to the meeting. I won't meet her. I want to go to lunch at her house. So I shuffled in literally in my slippers. I was introduced to her and I said, I'm so embarrassed. I'm wearing my slippers. And she was just the most gracious, warm person. And, from her great height, she looked down at me and that inimitable voice and she said, oh, dearie, if I could wear my slippers all the time, I would. She was just that kind of person who made you feel wonderful. So that's my Julia Child story.
That's great. That's great.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much for
People
sharing.
Her email.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, may we share your email address with some of our members who want to connect?
Sure.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you. It was wonderful.
Rudy, may I interrupt? This one time, usually I'm very silent, but for those of you who want to go to Russia,
we're going to be, be leading a co-delegation. I'll be leading the delegation. Jack Matlock, the ambassador, will be co-leading with me in June. The weather will be beautiful. It will be in the middle of white nights. And if any of you want to go to Russia, I think we already have 2 people from our group going with me. And so I would love to have quite a few more if you're interested.
Wow.
Thanks for sharing.
I hope to take 100 in this delegation.
Yeah.
It'll be the largest I've ever taken.
Yeah.
And we will be.
Richard
going
Denton,
about 40.
Richard Denton wants to go with
Oh,
you.
I want to go.
Well,
Oh, you all should. It's an amazing place.
I want to go. It's my heritage.
That's super. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Dara. That's a
Thank you.
beautiful,
Thank you, Dara. It was beautiful.
wonderful presentation.
So let me tell you about next week. So as we all know, we have amazing members in this e-club. And here is another one who will just give us an incredible experience of his life. This is going to be December 14th at John Dar Bradshaw. Let me tell you a little bit about John Dar. John Dar is a former NASA contractor and military aviator with extensive experience in the aerospace industry. Working alongside NASA scientists, engineers, and astronauts, John Dar has teamed up with science and technology educators from across the country to develop a varied, award-winning aerospace-themed engineering design challenges and activities for middle and high school students. Through his work with NASA, John Dar has designed and facilitated 28 space-themed robotic competitions and provided key support for 52 local, 38 regional, and 12 international robotic championship events for the FIRST and VEX robotics programs. He's an internationally known person, and it's going to be a fascinating talk next week. So we look forward
Sounds
to
great. Sounds great. Really good.
maybe it'll robots eat food too. Good
All
night.
right.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Good
Thank
night.
you, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Be safe out
Good
there.
night. Everybody be
Bye.
safe.
Thanks, Darren.
Good night.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, Fred, out in the
night.
boat.
Good night, everybody.
And Anya, you did a great job of introducing her.
Sure did.
Good job, Anya.
Yeah.
Oh,
Good
thank
job,
you.
Anya.
I'm
Have a
glad
good
it was a
smile.
great presentation.
Oh,
Yeah.
happy, remember what December 10th is? Human Rights Day.
Absolutely. Thank you, Barbara.
Okay.
Really,
Thank you for a beautiful presentation.
yeah.
Yes.
Good night. Good night,
lovely.
everyone.
Tony, good
Good
night,
night.
everyone.
Right.